Today, the topic of my presentation, as you can see, is soundscape of the city as its heritage. I would like to divide my presentation into parts. Firstly, I would like to explain my understanding of the relation between the concept of urban soundscape and the concept of urban heritage. In this part, I will discuss some possible advantages of the implementation of the audible dimension of the city into the domain of urban heritage. And I will propose a possible model of its safeguarding. In the second part, I will try to concentrate on risks and chances which I associate with the application of the historic urban landscape approach to the urban policy at the local level. Risks and chances in regards to the needs of urban soundscapes. The term soundscape was firstly introduced in the 70s by Canadian composer and theorist Raymond Murray Schafer. To Schafer, soundscape is any acoustic field of study. For example, musical composition is a soundscape, radio program is a soundscape according to Schafer, but also acoustic environment of human might be considered as soundscape. While using the term urban soundscape, I will thus refer to the acoustic environment of the given city, third dimension of its landscape. Which similarly to musical piece might be subject of composition and design. There is a significant gap in the broad area of interdisciplinary urban research in regards to the studies on urban sounds and the way they are being listened to and perceived by local communities. Such a situation might be explained by the primacy of vision in the Western culture, which leads to the underestimation of senses other than sight, such as hearing, as sources of relevant knowledge and environmental creativity. Domination of visual thinking is also evident in urban planning and urban heritage policy. For example, safeguarding practices are mostly concentrated on the preservation of visual values of urban heritage, such as panoramas, landscapes, with much lesser interest on its non-visual components. In other words, even though the interdisciplinary field of soundscape and sound studies is in the state of rapid development, at the level of urban heritage policy, sonic realm of the, and I'm relating mainly to the local level, the sonic realm of the urban environment is rarely taken into the consideration as a resource worthy to protect. However, primacy of vision and visual thinking is today broadly questioned. For example, many scholars at the field of critical urban research adopted the implication of so-called sensory turn. In the scope of sensory turn, senses other than sight, such as hearing, are being rediscovered and considered as equally important sources of the environmental knowledge, which might be used as a resource in the creation of high-quality, livable urban spaces. The adoption of the implication of the sensory turn is crucial for my understanding of the concept of urban heritage in respect to the domain of heritage. Through the perspective of sensory turn, the domain of urban heritage might be broadened to include audible components. Taking this into consideration, one might ask, what kind of heritage does the audible realm of the city constitute? Is it tangible or intangible? In the case of urban soundscapes, clear distinction between tangibility and intangibility cannot be made. Even though in everyday situation sound wave is invisible, its source is always material. But the way people listen to urban sounds and practices which stands for sonic ambience of exact location in the city are governed by intangible skills and ideas specific for the given urban culture. Protection of urban soundscape is thus a complex and reciprocal task which integrates and focuses many concerns of conservation and development. Safeguarding of specific characteristics of exact soundscape involve application of sound-aware practices, both in the material as well as socio-economic realm of the given city. For example, protection of sounds, which are characteristic for craftsman workshop at the Little Street of Warsaw, for example, would involve actions to protect the decaying professions. Maintenance of the sounds of lively cafe, which is important for cities, for example, which want to bring tourists and be seen as lively. Maintenance of the sounds of lively cafe will involve the maintenance of the function of the street, and so on. To justify the idea of the inclusion of urban soundscapes into the domain of urban heritage, I would like to focus on values which might be associated with the subject of such inclusion, values which might be associated with soundscapes. Similar justifying procedure has been performed in the field of environmental studies in regard to natural soundscapes. However, none of these studies focuses on associational value of urban soundscapes. Approach toward the concept of urban heritage based on the identification of ascribed values is openly anti-essentialist. It assumes that values of safeguarded objects and phenomena, regardless of its nature, be it a visual panorama or a soundscape, are associational rather than intrinsic. Assuming that, one might notice that the claim for the inclusion of acoustic dimension of urban landscape into the domain of urban heritage is mostly cultural, local, and thus might be verified by geography and history. With that in mind, several kinds of value might be associated with urban soundscape: aesthetic, environmental, social, cultural, or even economic. Let me briefly go through these categories. Research performed in the field of soundscape studies have shown that quality of soundscape impacts the perceived quality of life in the given area. Sounds evaluated as pleasant might slightly improve the perception of visual qualities of landscape. Soundscape vary according to their layout, according to the layout of the built environment, sources of the sound, functional program of the area. Urban landscape with high measure of vehicle noise are often considered as irritating, but high measure of sound of speech, human speech in urban landscape, makes it feel authentic and vibrant. In some cases, the quality of soundscape impacts the visit frequency and the length of stay in an exact area. Soundscapes are also the subject of aesthetic experience. Environmental sound has the capacity to create an ambience and distinctive character of the location, which might serve, for example, for branding purposes. But that's not only a purpose, branding. Urban sounds are also a rich source of cultural information due to their grounding in socio-cultural practices distributed through the landscape or located in the certain clusters in the city. The understanding of the meaning of sound marks such as bells, bugle halls, like this one in Hejnał Krakowski, or booms of the clock, led one to experience the cycles and cultural values of the given urban community. Due to its eventful character, sound brings dynamics to the built environment and function as a token of social and cultural life. Inclusion of sound sensitivity into the reflection on historic sites let one perceive them as part of broader urban dynamics not as a static frozen entities, subjected solely to material practice of conservation. It is thus quite clear that behind the urban sound there are cultural, social and economic practices which makes the city a living organism. This is the most important argument for urban soundscape protection, as well as an operational indication for projects are undertaken in this field. As one can notice, such an observation corresponds with UNESCO's explanation of historic urban landscape approach as tool meant to harmonize the needs. This probably might be regarded as presentist, part of the UNESCO recommendation, meant to harmonize the needs of conservation with the needs of socio-cultural and economic development. Due to the hybrid nature of urban soundscape, which are mixtures of tangible and intangible components, the practices of their protection, conservation and safeguarding need to be multifaceted. Development and application of safeguarding policy requires close cooperation between experts and specialists working in the interdisciplinary field of soundscape and urban studies, local communities and policymakers, both at the global and at the local level. With that in mind, I would like to propose the B-phase model of urban acoustic heritage protection, in which the phase of the research, documentation and sharing of acoustic data, for example through its dissemination with the use of new technologies and open access internet platforms, is equally important as the phase of the implementation of policy regulations regarding built environment and its impact on urban soundscape. B-phase model of the protection of acoustic urban heritage is inspired by the outcome of interdisciplinary research project performed by members of the Center for Research on Sonic Space, Urban Environment and Urban Environment in Grenoble and TAMK University of Applied Sciences in Tampere, Finland. The project was based on the documentation of sonic data of different European locations, triangulated with qualitative interviews exploring individual and cultural differences in case of listening. According to the scholars from Grenoble and Tampere, acoustic heritage is not something that can be protected with the use of traditional means of conservation, nor it can be transformed into property of a kind. To safeguard the acoustic heritage for the future generations, the more operational notion of the protection need to be adopted. The notion which is based on communication and sharing, realized through the development of new recording technologies and internet tools of dissemination of acoustic data. Approach proposed by researchers from Grenoble and Tampere initiates the broad debate over the renaissance of sonic culture as a part of urban heritage in contemporary European cities. If urban soundscapes might be evaluated as complex linkages between different spheres of urban living, thus the first step toward its protection lies in the promotion of the practice called active listening. The research phase of the B-phase model of urban soundscape protection rely on the listening as a non-visual diagnostic method, which might be used in the studies of cultural value of a given urban landscape. Such an approach has been undertaken during the interdisciplinary research project called Soundscape of St. Martin Street. Here you can see one of the outcome of this project. This is a spectrogram which shows the sound waves in one of St. Martin's gateways. Here you can see the brochure. This is in Polish. I just show it to you, you can see a brochure of this project realized in Poznan. A soundscape of St. Martin Street, performed in term of 2014 and in the term of 2014 and 2015, by cultural urban studies researchers, including speaker and acousticians from Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań. Project was devoted to recognition of the sonic characteristics of the main street of Poznań in the perception of its users, residents, workers, students, and tourists. This perspective of the user of the city is is in the center of cultural studies view at the city. That's how we research city, from the perspective of the users of city. Its initial purpose, the initial purpose of the project was mainly documental. However, in the course of the triangulated sonic and narrative data analysis, extreme potential of the use of sound-based methodologies in evaluation of the cultural potential of the urban space has been discovered. For example, analysis of certain aspects of St. Martin soundscape revealed some inadequacies in the functional program of the street. So I will now go to the second part, which will be shorter. Second phase of the B-phase model of urban soundscape protection is closely related to the practices of safeguarding of physical environment. So first phase was based on research, and the second is based on more practical endeavors. Urban layouts, type of building material being used, traffic regulations, among many other factors, affects the objective as well as perceived quality of acoustic dimension of a landscape. Sound-sensitive urban heritage policy would be thus also effective in the protection of physical environment of the given historic site. However, the opposite question might be asked. To what extent the present standard-setting regulations in heritage policy discourse are actually sound-aware in a broad sense of the term? In the beginning of this paper, I noticed that sonic dimension of the urban landscape is one of the most often overlooked by heritage policy. However, some ideas presented in UNESCO's recommendation on the use of historic urban landscape approach are quite promising in this regard. Let me take a brief look at some of them. Text of the recommendation presents the city as a dynamic and multi-layered entity. Such a perspective led one to see the realm of audible as one of its layers. Promising in regard to the development of sound-aware heritage policy is also an accentuation of the role of interdisciplinary research projects and platforms of knowledge transfer in the creation of solutions to the problems of rapidly changing cities. Road to the sound-aware urban policy starts at the grassroots level of research, where it might be embodied and tested. On this respect, UNESCO's care to facilitate communication between disciplines and scales may positively affect local urban heritage policies. Other important aspect of the landscape approach is connected with the promotion of the openness toward introduction of new functional programs for historic sites. Carefully selected functions might enliven and expand the complexity of acoustic environment of a given site by bringing new sound events and ambiances. So function, sound. There are also some risks which might be associated with the application of historic urban landscape. For example, postulate to harmonize needs of the conservation with the needs of development by opening historic landscape to the new investments, which is, to my opinion, strictly economic way of thinking, might cause some imbalances in the sonic dimension, both in physical as well as social-cultural terms. To conclude, idea proposed in historic urban landscape recommendation help to think about urban heritage as something connected with the broader city and break with the vision of historic sites as an isle in the sea of dynamic changes. I was trying to show that the concept of urban soundscape considered as urban heritage constitutes intriguing domain of inquiry, in which many practices, problems, and dimensions of urban living mix. Regardless to its open character mentioned above, text of the recommendation is visually oriented. A recommendation of UNESCO regarding historical landscape. Primacy of vision in heritage policy might be captured through the analysis of the very term landscape, which, as Denis Cosgrove, a British geographer, noticed is a focal point of visual ideology of possession and ownership. It might be thus informative to think about urban heritage not only in terms of landscapes, but in terms of soundscapes. Due to the complex nature of urban sonic realm, traditional practices of conservation need to be rethink and new ones need to be developed and tested. Thinking about urban soundscape as rich systems of communication let one deconstruct the notion of heritage as visual possession. In the case of acoustic heritage, one might say that it is alive when it is communicated and shared. And this, as I suppose, is the lesson which we can learn from urban sounds. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It has been, you can stay there for just a moment. It has been really a new addition, a new concept, but how we can enlarge or enrich the notion of culture or historic urban landscape. And do you happen to have any technical questions? No? Okay. In that case, thank you so much once more. And we'll have the last but not least, Melinda Harlow, also from Budapest. She studied cultural heritage and now she's studying history at a PhD level. And we've just seen some contemporary examples from Hungary, from Budapest in the previous paper, and now we'll see the public statues. So Melinda, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank you, the organizers, for this great event. It's really a pleasure to be able to part of it. And I am very happy to be, after all these amazing presentations, so you all can connect to my ideas to them. So for me, it's an easier task, even though I know everybody is looking for the lunch, so I try to be on time. So my topic is the historic urban landscape approach and use, and the post-2011 public statues on the territory of Budapest World Heritage Sites. Budapest was nominated 2 times, one in 1987. This is the black and white image from the original paper, so I'm sorry for the quality. And as you can see, it's basically the 2 sides of the Danube, including on the Buda side the castles and the Galley Bridge. In 2002, there was an expansion of that World Heritage Site with the yellow circled area, which is basically on the Avenue, Hero Square, and the first metro line under that road. So all in all, you can see on your right-hand side the whole territory. The pink ones are the buffer zones, and the mainly protected areas are the purple ones. As far as I could, based on my research, in 2016, most probably Margaret Island, the island to the north, is going to be a buffer zone as well. Based only on these territories, you can see that Budapest is really a landscape-oriented heritage. So my research regarding the historic urban landscape is concentrating on the World Heritage Sites, including the buffer zones in Budapest, because I think it's just the World Heritage Sites themselves with the buffer zones shows the intention that not just the structures with outstanding universal values are protected, but also their landscapes, the views were at the very beginning appreciated by UNESCO. There have been many changes, and many were noted by UNESCO World Heritage Committee. Starting from your left hand side is the French Institute on the Danube, and this is a modern building on the shore, which is kind of a new spot among the historic buildings that was discussed by UNESCO World Heritage Committee in 2009, if I'm not mistaken. On the other top image is in the Jewish quarter, and this is, as you can see, on one hand side are totally modern buildings that was due to reconstructions and demolition of old sites. On the bottom of the images, there are two new constructions, the reconstructions of Kossuth Square, where our parliament is, and there are new or renewed statues on there, and also the Royal Garden on the Buddha side under the castle. It's basically between the castle hill and the Danube, these green areas. And in the middle is the city garden, where we have totally new buildings and the huge reconstructions, and the city park, I'm sorry, and that's under construction. In theory, it's going to be ended in 2018, and UNESCO asked Hungarians to provide more details, so making sure that, because this area is a buffer zone and a certain area is the protected area, so it's a World Heritage Site that is going through a kind of reconstruction or rebuilding. We can discuss that in later. I have, as an inhabitant of Budapest, realized some new examples and new changes within the World Heritage Site. All the examples what you will see is after 2011 and in the territory of the World Heritage Site of Budapest. On your left-hand side is a modern statue of Colombo. We all know this very funny guy from the TV, and Peter Falk is the actor, and the street name is Folkmeksa. This is the only connection why this statue is here. There's no historical realization, no historic, urban, or outstanding universal value whatsoever why this statue is here. I'm not arguing pro or con, I'm just showing the relation between the two and the decision makers. The other statue on your right hand side is the March of Life Memorial, and this is there have been a long story and discussions about this statue, and I'm not going to go into details. Why I am emphasizing that this is now at the bridge, Elizabeth Bridge. The statue itself is looking at a parking plot under the bridge, and basically there is no space to realize or understand this statue. This is not the original space of the statue. The statue was planned to be located to another venue within Budapest, and it was moved. And I find it interestingly that the World Heritage Site and this area is protected area, so not buffer zone, can be a plan B for a statue. So that's why sources, mass media, tenders, etc. And on the other hand, I was looking on the Hungarian laws, regulations, as well as UNESCO World Heritage Conventions documentations about Hungary and the historic urban landscape. So my question was, if in any way historic urban landscape play a role when we are inaugurating a new statue on these sites. So based on my research, since 2011, more than 300 new public art inaugurations has happened in Budapest, and out of that, approximately 25% has happened on the World Heritage Sites. It's quite a lot of new statues in such a short time period, so I'm not going to enumerate all of them. I tried to show you some examples. So we have permanent statues, like the one in the castle about one of our previous prime minister. We have temporary statues, like the dogs of Dante. We have statues that are moved from one place to another one, and we have statues that are re-established. So it was stated before, then demolished during historical events and political reasons, and then now we have them again. We have statues that are established, so to say, on spot. This small circled plaque is to show that this is the exact place where the first Hungarian dance house has happened. You have to know the Hungarian dance house movement is World Heritage, intangible World Heritage now, so that's why I found it's a good example. We have statues, location asked by the artist, so this one is asked by the artist to place here. We have statues, location that seemingly has the purpose of hide. This is next to the wall of the castle, so basically it's very hard to see them, and also you are not able to walk around, or very hard. And we have representational reasons why Reagan statue is on our Freedom Square. Of course you can make some arguments why it was stated there, but there is no historic reasons why that statue is there. We have statues that are inaugurated or done by the request of the municipality. We have examples for gifts. This one is a gift to a pianist, and the pianist gave to the municipality of the first district because the pianist thought that this art piece should be able to be seen by the public. We have examples for civic organizations, initiatives, as well as we have examples when public support and money make it possible to have new public art pieces. In terms of genres, we have portraits, abstract art pieces, we have group statues, as well as plaques, as you can see, some symbolic examples, as well as busts. And we have also installations. This is the chained crown on our renewed Margaret Island. We can also name or categorize some examples that are connected to the past, as well as the value of that certain World Heritage site. This is in the Jewish district, a kind of artistic representation of the ghetto wall. We have totally contemporary art pieces, this one called the Star Watcher. And also we have statues that are dedicated for the future. This modern statue, both in terms of structure as well as material, shows the new world, so to say. We have examples that are locally, that has local relevance. For example, this one is commemorating the place of a church that was destructed. And we can say international requirements are served by this 3D map of the zoo that is also part of World Heritage. So, in my research literature, I have found many analyses of these statues. So you can have, you could read some of these notes saying that there is no modern sculpture in public art, in public areas in Hungary, and this is a very serious problem. And still today we have more representative statues rather than anything else. By representative statues, they mean that the message is more important than the quality, and also accordingly the spot or the location is part of the message, or supposedly part of the message, or has nothing to do with the message itself. Of course, we should not forget that public art is expensive, and also it is mainly political or governmental decision, or the realization of political messages. And also there is many artists says there is no interest of the public in establishing statues on public spaces. To connect to Aisha's representation of gaps, many said that due to or through our communist era we used to have many statues on public area. Most of these statues you might know, are even demolished or removed. So there are, so to say, a gap on these public areas where there are places for the new statues, but still there is no modern sculptures, as they said. But one more thing, of course there are exceptions, and I'm not mentioning some of those very special examples that were discussed in media, because they do not discuss my main analysis, which was looking through all these discussions if historic urban landscape or World Heritage Site or national history preservation meant in these examples, or if not, was there any defining feature or requirements that have been mentioned on it. And I would like to show you two examples. On your left-hand side, it's a World War II memorial of the 8th district, and it's on Hero Square. The statue is facing towards Hero Square, where we have our main memorial for World War I and II as well. So basically this municipality statue has the meaning or has the message by looking to a World Heritage Site and the history of urban territory and their meaning. On the other hand side, it's a new 2014 plaque near to Chain Bridge, where in 2 languages they describe or provide information about Clark, the architect, and as well as the Chain Bridge. So the aim, besides many World Heritage Sites, is to inform the public and to span the message why. What is the outstanding universal value? This is a good example that this plaque has the aim to provide information about that. So there are many reasons why there is lack of mentioning or lack of discussion about the area surrounding these sculptures. I have already mentioned you quite a few, but also they said that there are many stakeholders with responsibility over these territories. On your left-hand side, just for some representation, you have the municipality, the city, as well as the state. So there are 3 big owners of these territories. We have numerous managing and advising institutions, but like ICOMOS Hungary, Forster Center, or the Backbone-Nokság, which is it's a non-profit organization looking after the territory of the castle. Many says that there are lack of information about the international norms and requirements that you can see on your right-hand side. I mean the symbols of those. So basically what I can conclude that there is very few examples for discussing why these new statues are located where they are, if has any reference to the World Heritage Sites or the historic urban landscape. Why is it that? According to my research, I would say that the local preferences are more important or play crucial role rather than the international norms. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Actually, we've had all the 5 presentations. So if you don't mind, I would like to ask the paper givers, Jadwiga and Aisha, if you don't mind to sit here, Nada, and just move them here to me. And I think it's time to have a general discussion about the historic urban landscape. Yeah, we have all the 5 of us are here. We have a bit more than half an hour, so if you have any questions, you are most welcome to ask specifically to Melinda or to all of us. If not, okay.
Of course, yes.
Sure.
First of all, thank you very much for all of you. it was a very wide spectrum of presentations, so it's not really easy to find out the common denominator. Let's say this is HUL, but it's not so clear. But anyway, first question is going to you, Chairperson. It's not a question, not a comment. I was really admiring your paper, but at the very end you mentioned that the e-commerce is valid principles, and the HUL recommendations are just totally different or something like this. And if you have, allow me, I'm slightly disagree with that, because I know quite well these valid principles as an e-commerce member. And I think that the mentality is not so far from each other, but they are looking for the same object or same things from different angles of the things. And if you are reading carefully this Balata principles, there's also this a lot with intangible. But the biggest question is, to me at least, and this was my, how to say, question, part of my comments, that I think the HUL recommendation is not really concrete, I have to tell you. And the Balata principles, as usual with e-commerce documents, it has a kind of guidelines or it's a principles. So it is to say, want to be a help for those who have to deal with. And I think this is the main issue. And my question was, are you agree with it, disagree, and what it is? Because I think that both are international. But my feeling is, difficult to say, but UNESCO's recommendation is more political, and e-commerce's Balata principle is more professional. Sorry to tell you. I stop myself here.
Actually, thank you so much for your question. I'm extremely grateful, because first it allows me to summarize what I couldn't do at the end of the paper, and actually I think that would be a good introduction for the general debate also, because I'd like to ask you about the utility of the notion of history of urban landscape. So I think what I try to say that history, already cultural landscape is very, very difficult to define. Why? Because it's not academic. It's an administrative term which is entering academia, but it has, according to disciplines. I think if you ask an architect, a historian, a sociologist, etc., what cultural heritage is, the answers would be very different. And of course, and that's one of the characteristic of presentist terms. Most of the presentist terms, in the 19th century, academia was responsible to create identity, mainly national identity. Academia, especially social sciences and humanities, are losing their credit very quickly in the eye of the society, in the eye of the politicians and administrators. But identity is still to be formed. So if it's less academia, which is forming identity, it's more administration, bureaucracy. And one of the terms, or the locals, or the so-called, they don't, cultural heritage is a rubber term. It's like a piece of gum. You can use it for many purposes. An administrator, a bureaucrat, a politician, or even someone from academia, a scientist can use it. But the way they use it, the way they define it is different very often. And so that's the first point. And of course, cultural heritage, there's an expansion of cultural heritage from the 1970s. You know it all well. First it was tangible, then it was something else, and lacking a better notion, they said intangible. But intangible is so various. I don't want to dominate, I'm sorry, so I try to. So the problem of this expansion of cultural heritage raises millions of questions, because those who define or take part of the definition and the usage of cultural heritage has even a multiplication of definitions. But the interesting thing is there are professionals who are deeply concerned by this expansion. And one of those who are most concerned are the monument protections, mainly architects. And they try to keep, of course, this is my interpretation of the event, and historic urban landscape is a attempt to cover this expansion, including other aspects of urban heritage, but at the same time it's recognition that the previous one didn't work, is not enough anymore. And I think it's very interesting to see how in the mid-2000s, historic urban landscape was regarded as something, a solution, and it was very often repeated at the UNESCO also. You said it's political, of course, it's very much political since it's international. And of course, it's diplomats and others who debate questions, but after that, it's less and less obvious in UNESCO. This is my personal anecdote, but when I was in UNESCO, just as a researcher, of course, as a researcher is very annoying. And I said, I'd like to discuss historic urban landscape. A very, very high personality of UNESCO told me, I'm not interested in historic urban landscape. You, as a researcher, should work on visual integrity. That's what we want to know. And that was like, wow. So visual integrity is not part of historic urban landscape. And the Valletta, I know it is officially, but for certain it isn't. You see? So that's the same with visual integrity. What is visual integrity? We've seen many typology. You know, you can define so many different ways. But I think if we read behind the words, and that's why I'm glad that I knew that we would disagree. The e-commerce, the two, it didn't happen by chance that in 2011 there are two recommendations at the same time. This is institutional. One is saying that we should integrate those principles into urban heritage protection, which are not architectural, which are not monument protectional, which are very dangerous for the traditional monument-based protection of urban heritage, under the title of historic urban landscape. And e-commerce reacted, saying that no, we shouldn't. And of course, I agree that in the Valletta recommendation, principles, you have the same notions. You have visual integrity, you have integral heritage.
Integral, everything is there.
Yeah, but the definition is not the same. Because that's, yes.
Last sentence, it's very, thank you very much for this, putting into context the things. So it's interesting that the Valletta principles in several times quotes the previous UNESCO recommendation, the 1976 Nairobi recommendation on the same topic. It's really symptomatic that UNESCO had a previous recommendation, which unfortunately was never used enough, with a pity, and after that, on the basis of Vienna Memorandum, which is really the first action to open up the door, it was really a different direction. And just to go back for the word heritage, I'm sorry to use a not really correct definition. The HUL opened a new way for so-called tricky nominations. I don't want to continue with that.
Just one sentence, and I think that UNESCO and e-commerce is like, it's a theology. So they are creating a test of sacred texts, a body of sacred texts. You can never say it's bad. As a theology, you can never say a Quran or the Bible is bad. You can't say that. So because it's always an achievement of an international agreement. So if you disagree with the previous text, this is natural because of course we don't have the same concept of cultural heritage now as we had in the 1970s. You express it in another way. You refer it as important, but you redefine nicely, secretly, gently the meaning of that. So of course you will never read in none of the e-commerce or UNESCO texts that the previous text was bad, or I disagree with it. Yeah. There are other ways to express your disagreement, never verbally. So you have the impression that everybody it's a logical expansion. No, very often there are serious, I think there are serious changes
Thank you.
So thank you so much for your question. Please.
I'm sorry that my questions are also about the first presentation, but I think your presentation makes quite some controversial claims, and therefore I think it attracts just some attention. I'd like to point my fingers onto two conceptual points in your presentation, particularly concerning this dichotomy you identify between modernist and presentist. And well, basically what you are arguing is that in the presentist time frame, concepts are not as stable, they are more diffuse, and they are more open to local interpretation. I would like to question that claim, because I think any kinds of concepts always have been locally and historically variegated. So for instance, if you take in what you call your modernist time frame, if you take such concepts such as socialism or liberalism, they always have been variegated across different times and contexts, and have always been open to interpretations locally, and therefore I don't really see this dichotomy. And secondly, I think you should be a little bit more self-reflexive about your dichotomy, because what you're basically arguing is that in the modernist time frame, everybody was thinking in dichotomies about old, new, and the change between them, whereas in the presentist time frame, you say it's more continuous. Time has become more continuous, more free-flowing, and so on. The interesting thing is, when you make that claim, it should also apply to your own conceptualization. And your own conceptualization clearly is dichotomous between modernist and presentist, which is well, basically one of the key claims of the Cambridge School of the History of Ideas, that any kind of conceptual and historical claims always have to apply to themselves.
I didn't mean the reception of ideology, of course, by modernist and presentist. So of course there's always reception, and of course there are always differences of levels. I think the main concern was that in presentism we are more likely, and of course, okay, every analysis you simplify facts. So I was simplifying by this dichotomy in order to be able to give a definition of cultural heritage or contextualize cultural heritage, what we are lacking. Because if you have debates on cultural heritage, very often they just think that cultural heritage is any kind of transmission of culture, from antiquity up to now. And of course, if we have this definition, we don't really have a functional definition of cultural heritage, because it doesn't really show the novelty of cultural heritage, or why we have this notion. So by this notion has become so important from the second part of the 20th century onwards. So it would blur the specificity of cultural heritage in the second half of the 20th century and now. And you're right, of course, it's for the sake of understanding, I might have exaggerated the difference between presentism and modernism. But it's one of the reasons that I had 20 minutes, and if I wrote a book on this actually, and of course believe me, I'm more, I try to be more sensitive to the question. But I do think that it's very, one problem is very crucial for cultural heritage, and all the notions belong to the cultural heritage, including in a historic urban landscape, that from the 1970s onwards, we don't really have definition what we are now. We don't have an identical definition, as it was modernism, for example, with, of course, hundreds of millions of receptions, you're right. But at least there was one project. Now we are lacking this. So that's why if we are looking for, of course, my proposal, you like it or you buy it or you don't buy it, but I think at least presentism shows that what is certain for us, that we are sure about nothing, and this presentism is good for to understand why cultural heritage is so important, that our perception or the construction of our identity is based on very much avoiding a catastrophe and keeping up, maintaining whatever we have. And of course, if it's so crucial, we try to maintain as more and more and more, what explains why cultural heritage is expanding and why we put so much emphasis on this. At the same time, other social actors, even in the society, are still modernist. I wouldn't say that natural scientists or technology would be presentist. That would be absurd, right? But I talk about cultural heritage and why the notion is so important. And if it's the only certain thing that we want to avoid something, that's natural that those terms come into use which are very blurred or don't have a proper academic definition. Memory, commemoration, identity, cultural heritage, and from the territorial aspect, I would put landscape of the fifth. These all the 5 terms which are about personal perception, which are able to assure or a certain mobility within the different levels of the society, and which are not really defined by academia. Nonetheless, there are many theses and articles on these terms, but they are kind of a dialogue between the academia and the rest of the society. So it's very participative. I'm sorry, but I think I'm monopolizing the time. Yes.
Yep. Thank you for wonderful presentations, all of you, and unfortunately my question is to you. Well, you present the post-1970s world presentism as essentially a dark negative. I mean, if you see, you talk about fear of failure, failure of determinism, credit loss. So if that is the case, that essentially it's negative, there is unexpected times ahead, we don't know where we are headed. But do you think you would like to tweak the definition looking at what has happened in the last 15, 20 years, especially looking at the way global capital flows seems to be, well, formation of almost a new ideology, if you may. And that seems to be almost an overarching universal ideology that everyone seems to be lapping up to. So I'm just wondering, post-1970s onwards, do you see a shift happening in the last 15 years or 20 years, where we have seen massive amount of flows, as somebody has called, flows of ideas, flows of spaces, due to the flow of capital. And the ideology really is capital, or the celebration of wealth. How do you fit this situation, post-global situation, in this definition of presentism?
How would you call this ideology or this flow? What definition would be?
No, I mean, I see it as very aspirational in nature. One, it is something that is one aspiration that seems to be almost at a direct conflict with what we somehow believed in what our cities should be. So cities kind of compete for capital now. Cities are almost like corporates that are competing with each other, which is essentially a phenomena where the federal funding to the city decreases and cities have to stand on their own, a very post-global structural reform that most cities went into. I'm just wondering, does it not kind of alter the definition of presentism from one being very skeptical, negative, and to the one being slightly aspirational in nature, a new ideology on the horizon? I'm just provoking, if you would.
You're doing very right, actually. It's interesting whether we can build identity on the basis of flow of capital.
Yeah.
And that's why I asked the term, because for ideology you always need a term and you always need a project or a concept.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, yeah.
So that's exactly the point, that all the ideologies, what we are used to, stemming from the 19th century, had a project or was offering
had an
something.
idea of.
That's why it's modernist. I think nowadays it's really difficult to find this. I mean, it's really difficult even to pin down an ideology. I mean, we talk about neoliberalism, neo-socialism, and all these neos, but these neo also mean that they're already being used in a way, and it's a reinterpretation, and it's very difficult to say that I'm a happy neoliberal or I'm a neo-socialist. It doesn't really give an identity in that sense.
May I ask some question to another panelist? panelists.
Oh, excellent. Thank you so much.
To Mrs. Aisha and to Mr. Adam also. It will be some kind of personal question, sorry for that, but in my opinion, to compare your perspectives, different experiences, it will be good. My question touches the architecture from socialist times in the Central Europe, in Poland, for example, in Wrocław, there's a place called Nowy Targ, Nowy Rynek, New Market, and we can see the example of the 60s or 70s blocks of flats. And some people in Poland, we can hear some voices in here from the conservatory officers that we should preserve it as the heritage. I'm not talking about such beautiful examples like you showed in Budapest, but some regular block of flats in a rectangular shape. We got plenty of them in many cities in Central Europe. In northern Poland, after World War II, we got plenty of cities. We've completely destroyed the historical tissue, the historical urban centers. And after World War II, we built there some communist times architectural block of flats. Of course, it's the individual case. Each case is different, and each situation is different. For example, one building or whole the urban district. But what's your opinion? Do you perceive it as some kind of heritage, or should we destroy it and reshape it in a historism mainstream? What's your opinion?
I can do a comment for the case of Nowy Targ in Wrocław. Personally, I have already considered it as a heritage because it's a phase in the history of the city. So, and it's somehow relatively harmonious with the, at minimum, for the heights of the urban tissue, etc. So we cannot cancel this phase. So if we cancel it, so it's a problem. We cannot cancel a phase of the life of the city. So we can consider it as a heritage already. So it's a step of the whole life.
Even in a bigger scale, in a whole city center? I don't know.
Because it's, I'm speaking of the square of Nowy Targ that you mentioned, and on this zone with this type of urban planning. So it's the architecture of the years 70s. So for the other parts, maybe we can see another mosaic between, as I showed for some examples, very high buildings, etc. No, here we have to stop, and maybe we can go back a little bit, because when we see an exaggerated example which is not respecting the vicinity, the historical monument or a historical fabric, etc. Here we have to stop and discuss. No, maybe we can cancel if it's feasible. If not, it's a problematic, but maybe we have to accept it, but we would not like to. So I don't know. Did I respond?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, it's a bit complicated, but I think it is a heritage. It's no question, it is a heritage, but of course not everything should be preserved, and not everything should be listed as a monument, but some of them should be. I think the main issue is that this period, the last decades, are the same periods as the previous ones. We have to look them, and we have to see what is valuable, what is not valuable, and we have to preserve some of them and not everything. The problem is always that the previous period is always seen something out of fashion. Now, I think we can step one step backward and see all these things just like the earlier periods. This is a task which is absolutely not solved in Hungary, but nowadays we make perhaps something to solve it, but it will be a very long process.
I'd like to refer to the last presentation, which touches the very important element of urban space, the statues, fountains, and the little elements which create the atmosphere, the character of some small urban spaces. And in the past, there were competitions for the new fountain or for the new statues, and in some cases there were even 100 entries and projects presented, and the one which was realized was very thoroughly selected. Nowadays, also in Poland, it looks that there is a very dangerous tendency to place statues commemorating plates all over, also in historic centers. So that's not only Hungarian problem, it's all over Central Europe, I think. And my question refers to aesthetical quality of this public art and the way the artist and the artist is selected. Does it happen through the competition or through the commission or through the tender? And do you refer to the aesthetical values too, and do you try to analyze that in your research?
Thank you for the question, and also to point out that it's an international problem. Based on my research, I would say that most of the scholars and participants as well, thinks that there is no aesthetic values in these newly established art pieces, and it's not what is looked for mainly. Of course, there are exceptions, but that's the trend. And why it is because it's public art, and because it's public art, it's mainly message, political or representational. So it's more the message than the quality, which is important. And that's the case all the time, so not just after 2011, that was typical earlier before. I must say that because there is no modern sculpture art tendencies available or possible on public art pieces now in Hungary, and you can name that it's because the tenders, some of them are invited tenders or closed tenders, there are changes in it, and so there are certain instrumental problems about that, and also financials. But the fact that there is no place, even in galleries, for these modern quality sculptures, that is the reason why aesthetic is still not in the place it should be. I think that's the most politically correct things that I can say. And I am, in my research, I was more looking for the question of historic urban landscape and world heritage sites. So whether the location defines or influences the sculpture or not. Because most of these tenders have already named the place, unless it is moved, like one of the examples. But they usually say we would like to have a sculpture to this location. But the location is named, but the qualities or the characteristics of the location does not influence the sculpture or the tender itself.
Yes, because there is a lack of awareness, I would say, that it's not only the sculpture or the statue, but it's the surrounding, and that should be designed and composed as a whole,
Exactly.
as a part of urban space, not only an art itself.
Yeah, and this is true in both ways. So the already existing qualities or characters of the space does not influence the decision makers or the vendors, and from the other way around, the sculpture itself, in the decision making, no one, or it seems that no one cares about the fact that this statue is going to dominate or not dominate the location. So that's a problem. And so the square as well as the quality, because of the art or genre of public art, question mark, is the reason of lacking of aesthetics. As far as I could see, but as I said, my research was not on the aesthetic analysis mainly.
My question is actually to Jadwiga, so we can close the circle. I really appreciated your lecture and that you brought in this topic, this new aspect, the sound. My question is, does this approach, the whole soundscape, consider kind of the sound pollution, the noise aspect? I mean, the aspects that can actually decrease the quality of the urban experience. So can we then start talking about, similar to visual integrity, like audio integrity or sonic integrity? And can this lead to the kind of the regulation of sound in the city? And I don't know, like streetcars and buses and whatever, what you mentioned at the cafe. Where do you think this can lead?
Yeah, thank you for your question. The audible dimension is not today taken into consideration, like at this level of the UNESCO policy. And so, from that perspective, there is no thinking about acoustic design, because what you are talking about, as I understand, is acoustic design. And research and attempts to initiate some activities connected with acoustic design, like for example lowering the level of noise in the city, are taken. However, noise is not the most important problem in regard to soundscapes for our cities. And there are two different perspectives in regard to sound. The one which is connected with regulation of noise, so this is kind of negative approach, and the other one is the one started with Schaffer and Trucks and others, who noticed that sound is not only a waste, sound and noise, it's not always waste, it is sometimes a resource. And noise, because there's your question showing some kind of interesting domain in the research on soundscapes. The meeting between objective measures and subjective impressions and sensations. So, so in that case, noise and regulating noise with this approach of acoustic design is not always the issue. I don't know.
Well, it can be if it comes to that noise is actually, what do you call it? Like you cannot appreciate the sounds because of the noise. So then you have to regulate the sound pollution in order to enjoy or to maximize the soundscape experience.
Yeah, that's true. That some examples show that, of course, if the level of measure of noise is reaching the decibels which we can take, it's of course we just need to change it. But it's not always. Research shown that, for example, when we use those sound panels to protect areas from the noise, the quality of life not always gets better after the construction of the panel. So maybe there are some other factors which affect this situation. population. But yeah, of course, high measure of noise are, for example, like from airports, always affect our feeling.
Thank you so much. And our last question.
Just have a small question about the soundscapes. How much is it popular now among cities? I would even ask not only about the cities in Central Europe, but globally, the whole concept of looking at the issue, because I have to confess it's quite fresh thing for me. So, is it a big deal? Would you say that many cities really look at the issue from, let's say, a holistic point of view, or it's just something very new?
Okay. Thank you for your question. It's very important because you're right. At the level of policy, there's, especially in the European cities, not only, I think, everywhere, it's not, sound is not taken into consideration. It's an overlooked dimension of urban living. However, the field of soundscape studies and sound studies, which is a very interdisciplinary field, where acousticians, physicians, psychologists, cultural studies researchers and other meets perform some research which what outcomes might be implemented in the policy at the local level. There's also the question like how to perform those things at the local level. However, I think very often nicely performed research and evidence meets some problems with the implementation because at the policy level there is no sensitivity toward sound. So it's a fresh idea from my, as far as I know, for this linking soundscapes, the reflection of soundscape with heritage, especially in case of urban soundscapes.
It's quite relevant. I can tell you from my practical experience, a group of residents in Edinburgh was complaining about the increased level of noise on the cobbled streets, because at some stage the council had to open one of the residential streets for quite heavy traffic due to important diversions, which resulted in a significant increase of noise. And they end up in arguments which included, for instance, tarmacking historic streets, and these kind of issues. So I think eventually it can be a big deal. So let's wait for the EU to enlighten us on how to deal with it.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we could see how comprehensive the history of urban landscape is. So, question?
Yes.
Okay. Other problems? I don't know if we can do that. It's 2 o'clock. So we're supposed to. Okay. So we have like 2 more questions. Fine.
Okay. I have more, not a question, more a comment or ask for clarifying if I understood well. And it's directed to Ms. Aisha. I'm from Gdańsk, so the things you shown are very familiar to me, especially one example on the Grząska, the building in Grząska. Do you remember this one? Grząska, yes. So, and to be honest, tomorrow I will be talking about this. Yes, on the right. Yeah. Yes. So, as I remember, as I understood, you classify this building as a good example because it has a good height, a well height. And my proposition is maybe just to not to make some general opinion about this kind of buildings as this one, and maybe to look also on the relation in the urban quarter, because this building was built in the less important street than the rest buildings, which this one is referred to, and it's supposed to be, from the historical point of view, lower than it is right now. And this building is higher than these which are right now in the main streets, which are just next to. And in the, let's say, people I talk to with about this building, they are architects or conservator officers. All they say that it's a bad example just because of this height, but also because of the roof. Because roof is not following the facade shape, it's parallel to the street, the right part of the building. So just to be, my comment is just to be very...
I want to comment on this example. In fact, the source of this example is the National Board of I can't see the name exactly, but they mentioned it as a bad example. It is a bad example, but I didn't. The point that I wanted to focus on that in this example, they try to respect the general height, but inside this general volume, I said we have to stop and discuss more the details, because the facades are badly treated. Because I mentioned that in the historic fabric in this area in Gdansk, the openings are like a music intonation, are not on the same lines. However, here they are all the same lines, etc., which is a bad thing. So I mentioned this maybe quickly because it is a bad question. No, it is. Because maybe somebody, I compared the height with the neighborhood, the neighboring buildings. I found some with 5 floors, some with 4 floors. So maybe there is a little bit a small difference in heights, but the general volume is relatively acceptable. But the details of the facades are horrible. So inside a global framework, there is horrible details in fact. So,
okay, I think we need to discuss it.
I think you can discuss it during lunch. It's very interesting. The very last question.
The very last question refers to Aisha's presentation. I'm an architect and I come from Silesia, so Wrocław example is close to me specifically, that I'm making research on post-war reconstruction in Western Poland. So we will discuss later on, but my comment or my suggestion would be, would you like to consider to place the time periods of post-war reconstruction more precisely, to put it into your future article or research? So it would be worth to specify the post-war reconstruction according to Polish Conservation School and Professor Jan Zachwatowicz, which ended in the middle of 50s, and then came the period of the time of new forms, which didn't refer and didn't respect historical identity of the towns. And the year 2000 brought new perspective, and maybe it would be worth to specify this period in more in a stronger way.
Thank you for this comment. When I saw the notice of 3 minutes remaining, so I passed very quickly for Wrocław. I explained maybe Gdańsk more, and I passed very quickly to arrive to the conclusion. So really in Wrocław it's much, maybe in Gdańsk it's more respectful interventions than in Wrocław. In Wrocław I saw, because I personally I visited the city. It's a very different. Here you find really. I can mention the building of the cinema, the new cinema center near the ghetto.
Yes.
Near the ghetto. It's a very modern, very big scale compared with the urban context. So you are right in this point, and it's more detailed, but I passed really quickly through this thing. It's a very interesting example as a city with this experience of reconstruction. So at the end, I wanted that everyone of the audience ask himself a question, or to relay the 3 examples of Elbląg, of Wrocław, and of Gdańsk, because every example is particular. So, and to make use of these examples for propositions which could be useful for 3 of all the 3 examples, and the cities that these examples represent also.
Okay, we will discuss this later on.
Yeah, thank you, pleasure.
I think what I left to do is thank you for the organizers for the excellent topic. I think the historical urban landscape is a lot to discuss about, so it's good to put it on in our mind. Thank you for the panelists for the excellent papers, and thank you for the audience for the patience, tolerance, and the excellent questions.